Hey, what's going on guys? Coda here, and I got a theory. And that's all that it is. This is a theory discussion video about Total War, Games Workshop, Warhammer, and the High Elves. This is all for fun, nothing official, and hopefully just an interesting or entertaining listen. In this podcast style video, I'm going to give my thoughts on why I think the High Elves are being designed as the perfect beginner-friendly introductory army for Total War Warhammer 2. And why that's a very good thing for all of us, for you, for me, for Warhammer, for Total War, everyone. Saying beginner anything could be viewed as a negative, but it shouldn't be, and that's not what I think at all. Introductory is probably more accurate. So the quick outline is, I'm going to talk about why Total War in general needs a great beginner faction, why it isn't the Dwarves, and the evidence for why I do think it will be the Elves of Ulthuan. So let's get into it. As a great prophet once said, here we go. So why would Total War Warhammer, or Total War in general, need a beginner faction at all? Let's start from the top. Total War games have a very steep learning curve. It doesn't matter if you're looking at it from an RTS perspective, a strategy perspective, or just gaming in general. I think a lot of people forget this. Even if you personally find the Total War games very easy, that's likely related to you having hours and hours of playtime and experience under your belt. Try to think back to when you first tried the campaign or even a quick battle. So truthfully, the game can be quite daunting for new players, even with the help of the old man guide that Creative Assembly so cleverly included. New players trying Total War will find the controls vastly different from other RTS staples, like Dawn of War or StarCraft. Grouping, locking, flanking, fire arcs, attack orders, even moving your army well requires a more in-depth understanding of the Total War system. Now, all of this is to say that this is also what makes Total War games second to none in terms of strategy. Let us not forget that little part, because that's why they're so great. At one point, before Creative Assembly acquired the Warhammer IP from Games Workshop, the Total War historical titles were mostly played by and made for more elite niche gamers. But that all changed once Warhammer came into the picture. Whether you like it or not, and I'm assuming you like it if you're listening to this, the Warhammer IP absolutely skyrocketed Total War in terms of popularity. Now that isn't to say it was bad or unpopular or anything like that prior to this partnership, but the numbers don't lie. If you go by the stats, Total War Warhammer is much larger than its historical cousins. I don't think Games Workshop or Creative Assembly really anticipated just how popular this combination would be. If you think about it in relation to Age of Sigmar or the end of Warhammer Fantasy Tabletop alone, the timing does seem a little bit strange. And from their perspective, there have been tons of Games Workshop IP video games that weren't received as well or didn't blow up as big. But at the end of the day, Games Workshop and the Warhammer Universe are easily one of the most well-known and loved fantasy settings in the world. Of course, it's not on like a Tolkien or Star Wars level, but it's still very big. And what's even more, the people and fans who do love Warhammer are extremely devoted and invested. Basically, the stars aligned in no small part due to the work of Creative Assembly, and Total War Warhammer became an RTS fantasy juggernaut. But this created a bit of a new issue, because now you have an influx of new players who are willing to try your game simply because of their love for the setting, but a game system that is relatively challenging to learn and has mostly existed for a niche market of history buffs. The last thing any business wants is for 500% more people to try their product, but have half of them give it up after being discouraged. But being creative in any field is essentially a series of solving problems. And being the talented creatives they are, it appears CA is going to solve this problem very well. With the launch of their new sequel, a game that I'm sure is forecasted to be even more of a hit than the first, they have the perfect opportunity to acquire and keep tons of new players. And that's a very good thing for all of us, for the Total War community in general, both Warhammer and historical. All ships rise with the tide, boys and girls, always remember that. Okay, now, I know what you're thinking. Aren't the Dwarves already the beginner faction for Total War? They're easier to play and more forgiving for new players than pretty much any other race. And while it's true that the Dawi are a little bit easier in the campaign and do tend to be more forgiving for new players, I'd argue that they're actually not the best introductory or beginner faction for new players to Total War Warhammer. The Dwarves don't adequately prepare new players to transition to other factions in the game. While they are very powerful and forgiving, they don't teach players how to use cavalry, magic, monsters. I mean, if you think about it, they're actually a very niche faction with a very niche style of play. So I guess the main takeaway point is that being easier to play does not automatically equal a great beginner or introductory faction. In fact, it could even take away from that a little bit. For example, if a new player becomes too used to having really fantastic armor, really good long-range firepower, or a very defensive playstyle, they may not learn how to move or position a different army, or how or why to flank with cav, or to learn to protect units that don't have armor. On the flip side of this, some of the factions that do have all of these various unit types like monsters and magic and cav, and the whole spectrum, could prove too daunting in battle as well as the campaign. So my prediction is that Creative Assembly is designing a faction that takes the best of both worlds in order to create a great experience for beginners. That they will introduce a race that has the power, armor, and some of the forgivability of the Dwarves, but that also trains players in the use of cav, magic, monsters, artillery, infantry, skirmishing, heroes, and lords without being overwhelming. And of course, I think that race will be the High Elves. Now, it goes without saying, I could be totally wrong. This is only a speculation and discussion video, so of course I could be wrong and eat shit for the rest of my life or whatever. But this is why I think so. I'm pretty much basing this whole argument off of the roster reveal and the interview. Based on the roster, the High Elves seem to be an army that will offer players limited choices in terms of units per category, but that they will have units in every category nonetheless. So maybe that's stupid or confusing, so this is an example. If I'm a new player who wants to bring heavily armored anti-large cav, if I'm playing the High Elves, I have exactly one choice. I cannot mess it up. I have the Dragon Princes of Kaldor, who will be an extremely powerful heavy cav unit, and that's that. Now, if I'm playing the Empire, I could take Reichsguard, Demigriffs, Demis with Halberds, the Royal Altdorf Demis, I mean, who knows. If I'm playing Bretonnia, I could take Grail Knights, Knights of the Realm, or I could even get confused and take Grail Guardians, I mean, who knows. These are things that we take for granted, but it's not very easy for a new player. So this seems to be loosely a reoccurring theme in the High Elf roster as a whole. This happens to be very accurate to their lore as well, and that could be all that it is, and I'm just reading into it way too much, but let's just pretend. So, if I'm playing High Elves and I want an armor-piercing anti-large infantry unit, I have exactly one choice, the Phoenix Guard. If I want skirmish cav, I have exactly one choice, the Illyrian Reavers. Even if I want an artillery piece, I have exactly one choice, the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. This kind of simplicity is not a bad thing at all, especially it's something that's very good for new players. Analysis paralysis is so real in this game. I mean, how many times do you queue up on ladder in multiplayer or whatever, and you feel super rushed picking an army, deciding between this and that, and then boom, your opponent readies up and you're like, my army sucks. Right? Like that happens to everybody. And I truly think that the High Elves are being designed to mitigate this. But that's a two-part thought, because there was an additional clue that reinforces this. In the little roster reveal livestream, Creative Assembly often mentioned the pure power level of all of the units they were revealing. In fact, the actual phrase, quote, best in the game, was used several times when talking about things like the Star Dragons, the Dragon Princes, the Phoenix Guard, and I think even a few other units. That could of course just be Creative Assembly hyping up whatever they are currently talking about, but it also just so happens to fit perfectly into my little theory. Because if you're going to limit the choices of a faction so they only have one or two options for any given task or unit type, then those one or two choices have to be very powerful, especially if you're looking to attract and retain new players. That way, if I learn enough to at least know when I need armor piercing, or when I need monsters, or when I need anti-large, it's very hard for me to mess it up as a new player, at least, to some degree. And lastly, the few units that weren't framed as being extremely powerful were framed as being extremely versatile. The Lore Master of Hoeth is a great example. He's the hero that knows basic spells from every school of magic, right? So that eliminates the question of which type of magic is the appropriate one for this particular matchup, or, something like that. He's sort of a jack of all trades that can be useful in any matchup, as in, you can't go wrong if you pick this guy. The same goes for the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. It's literally one artillery unit choice, and it can toggle between two modes of fire depending on what you need it to kill. Again, it's a can't go wrong type of unit because it's flexible and versatile enough to pay off in any matchup. And who else? Shit, let me look at my notes here. Oh yeah, and then there's the Lothern Sea Guard, the absolute pinnacle of like a versatile, forgiving, and beginner-friendly unit. These are those missile infantry units that also come armed with spears. So this makes for a very forgiving skirmish unit, probably the most forgiving skirmish unit in the game, because it actually does a pretty good job of countering one of its main counters, which is Cav. So there you have it, guys, my thoughts on why Total War Warhammer needs an official beginner-friendly introductory faction, why it isn't the Dwarves, and at least the signs that I see that point to the High Elves fulfilling this role. Again, this says absolutely nothing about their power level. It doesn't make them automatically under or overpowered. It wouldn't mean you are playing a new player every time you face them on ladder. It really doesn't have any negative implications for multiplayer at all. What could, and this is a very big could happen, is that the smaller pool of choices makes the High Elves a little bit more predictable online, as in you know what's coming more often. But that will likely be offset by the power and capability of their units, and it's not like that's very dissimilar to a lot of the builds that we see now. You may know Double Raise Dead and Double Heal are coming, but that doesn't make it a whole lot easier to stop, just as an example. But all in all, guys, the High Elves look to be an incredible race in Total War Warhammer 2 that will no doubt be an anchor in the story and in the gameplay. I'm really excited about them. They are probably one of my favorite factions. And if they bring in that many more new players, then that's all the better. As always, thank you for listening, guys. This is Coda, and take care.